After the era of Edgar Snow to right now is already, I think, more than 80 years or 80 years past. How is the CCP now in Beijing different from the CCP in Yan'an? What's your idea?
It's really hard to say. The history, the reporting from the CCP in 1930s and 1940s was also very much influenced by wishful thinking. Joe Stilwell, General Stilwell, sent a group up to Yan'an to see if it's worth working with the communists instead of the nationalists. They called it the Dixie Mission. And they sent some very positive stories back to say, well, these guys are willing to fight and they do guerrilla tactics very well and those things. But again, they were being influenced by Zhou Enlai and others through, it was propaganda, a lot of it. They were never allowed to actually go see the communist forces conducting guerrilla warfare. Meanwhile, there's other stories about collaboration with the Japanese in the north, in Yan'an, to again defeat the nationalists. So I trust that people like you have a better idea, because what we read in the United States, I don't think was accurate. It was kind of wishful thinking and hopeful. Whereas what we see today is actually the CCP that is. We understand China as it is, the Chinese government, rather than how we want it to be. We've been wishing for something better for a long
time. Yeah. The principles, three principles of the people. This theory was raised by the Mr. Sun Zhongshan or Sun Yixin. Yeah, the founder of the Nationalist Party. And what's your idea? Did the Republic of China, in Taiwan, deliver on their promise of this principle? In other words, they already a real democratic society in Taiwan.
Well, everybody claims Sun Zhongshan as their birthright. You see, I'm in Hawaii right now. I live here. Sun Zhongshan spent a long time in Maui.
Okay.
He's a Hawaii boy. And then he spent a lot of time in Japan. In Japan, his name is Nakayama, right? Zhongshan is pronounced Nakayama. And so he was very good at fitting in wherever he was. And I think his ideas on democracy and reform and change in China were useful, and they were good. But then the CCP took his ideas. Look at China today. Does it resemble in any way what Sun Zhongshan said? Democratic principles? It doesn't. So they claim his heritage, but they don't live up to his ideals.
You do have a very good, very deep observation to Chinese history. So since we are talking about Taiwan, how is the U.S. policy on Taiwan?
It's much better than it was. For the longest time, our attitude toward the PRC was, if you treat China like an enemy, they will become an enemy. And the people who said that should have known better. These are people who've lived in the PRC, and they've lived in the embassy, and they've been treated very badly by the Chinese government. So they should have really understood that, but they didn't. And the fact is that the communist government has always treated the United States as the high-tech enemy, right? Since 1950, since the Korean War. If you look at internal party documents, it calls the U.S. the adversary. No, they call them the enemy, right? And we in the U.S. have been trying to win them over and teach them to like us and understand how good it is to be a democracy. Well, when I got to the State Department, Secretary Pompeo was already there. He understood the problem. And so, the group of us, all of us, were able to work together to wake up the American government to the fact that the PRC says nice words, but at the same time, they're stabbing you in the back in trade, in access, in information, and certainly in military terms. And so we had to wake up. Now, people are saying that the U.S.'s attitude is moving everyone closer to war. Well, let's give China credit for its own policies and its own decisions. Chinese policies have pushed us to this point. And we've given them every opportunity to treat us with, mutual respect, mutual benefit, win-win. These are the ideas of new type 新型大国关系, right? There is no win-win in the relationship. There is no mutual respect. I can tell you that firsthand. If you look at how our diplomats are treated in China to how we treat theirs here in the US, or how our American media, newspaper people are treated in China compared to how we allow them full reign in the US, there's no mutual respect or mutual benefit. So all we did was acknowledge the truth and act on that. And yeah, we took a very hard stand. And I'm happy to see that the new administration continues to take a hard stand, because that's all the Communist Party understands is force. They don't understand subtle diplomacy. They understand force. And we have strength, we have to use it.
You think they understand the voice? They understand the difference. They know they are weak in comparison with the real power or the real military power of the U.S., but they still do that to threaten to Taiwan. My question is, you mentioned about 1950s after the Korean War. U.S. at that time was trying to curb the expansion of communism. Is it much more complicated now? You know, right now facing much more interwoven economic relationship, right? Chinese Wall Street, they have a more investment upon China.
Oh, yeah.
China have a lot of business in the U.S., and they both have some business and connection with Taiwan. Does it make U.S. support to Taiwan inadequate to the task, or more word than action?
It's a hard question, obviously, and in some ways it is definitely more complicated because of Taiwan's relationship with the mainland, right? SMIC, TSMC, trade, KMT versus DPP. These things are all, make that relationship more complicated. But it's less complicated too, because the U.S. has finally come around to think about what is our strength. I mean, yeah, we have a big military and all those things. We have a big economy, but what is our real strength? Our real strength is democracy. It's respect for human beings and those shared values that Japan, Korea, Australia, India, others all agree. And so, one of the things we tried to do was put more emphasis on using the power of like-minded allies and partners. I mean, even Vietnam, who we fought a war with up until 1975, is a very productive and helpful counterpart in the region, because they also are suffering from, and they've suffered for 2,000 years from Chinese incursions. 1979, China invaded northern Vietnam, fought a war there. So we finally woke up and realized that rather than take on the PRC problem by ourselves, we need to use everybody else as well. And the Quad isn't just about China, but it's about dealing with invading India, right? The border war between India and China, and it's about Chinese activity in the South China Sea that threatens Australia and it threatens Japan. So it's more complicated, but the fact that these countries have awakened and are aware of the real problem and are willing to start doing something about it, the solutions are much easier and it's much closer. Japan came in very strong on Taiwan. It said, if China attacks Taiwan, with or without the U.S., they're going to do something about it, because the Senkakus and Okinawa now become a threat. And there's much more to that. Australia said it's inconceivable that there not be a part of any activity, that the U.S. was involved in. And we just did another Quad iteration here last week. So this is our strength. How many allies does China have?
Korea? North Korea? Only?
None.
No? None. Okay.
North Korea is not China's friend. They claim to be allies, but 1950 to 53, they were allies. How about Pakistan? Pakistan is doing its best to rebuild its relationship with the U.S. right now, because the China-Pakistan economic corridor is going so badly. And then you hear a lot today that says China and Russia, are going to shake hands and be, one powerful force. I mean, that's impossible. That just can't happen. The name of Vladivostok, the Russian port city near Heilongjiang, north of North Korea, the Chinese name for it is Haishenwai.
Vladivostok. Yeah, Vladivostok.
Yeah. And prior to 1860, the Treaty of Beijing, before that was Chinese territory. So I asked my PLA, my Jiefangjun friends, you're very upset about South China Sea. Okay, that's fine, but you should be very upset about Haishenwei, right? You should be very upset about Vladivostok because you no longer have access to the Sea of Japan, right? North Korea and Russia built a bridge over the Tumen River to prevent Chinese ships from going into China through that access. And they don't have that port anymore. And so I don't think Russia could be considered a friend under those conditions and others. There's a lot of other reasons.
In my point of view, that the only enemy from the East Asia to Russia think only Japan is the enemy. Because in the history, only Japan had defeated them, not China. Mm. China sacrificed a lot of lands to obtain a treaty between the two countries. They are not there to fight with Russia. This is the same situation today. Talk about the treaty, the Russia and China, but they claimed, though there right now is a partner, so-called cooperation partners, but they thought there was no limits on their cooperation. Is U.S. government real afraid of they can set up a kind of a treaty like allies? They can become allied countries?
No. I'll bet. Pick something. I'll bet my shirt. I'll bet my car. There's no way that can happen. There's just too much negative history between the two. Think about 1969, there was an active tank war between Russia or Soviet Union and China on the Mongolian border, right? Ussuri River.
Almost nuclear war.
Yeah.
The chief secretary of Soviet Union right now is Brezhnev.
Oh, Brezhnev.
I don't know exactly the name of English. It's in China, Brezhnev at that time. They start a war from a faraway island on the northern border.
Right.
On the northern border, they start from the island, and then later U.S. send up the information to Communist Party, to PRC, via the media, via the newspaper, to warn them there will be a nuclear war. That is the history. That is the truth.
So look, I wish that people in China could read this history. I wish they could read, you mentioned Stilwell, I wish they could read that the U.S. has been a strong friend of the Chinese people forever.
Right.
We're not the enemy. I mean, thousands and thousands of American soldiers died in China, defending China from external attack, right? In that case, the Japanese. But we don't teach that history anymore. Why not? People should understand that the U.S. is very friendly to the people of China. We have so much in common. Our issue is with the government. The government it does not live up to its promises, Hong Kong, right? It'll say it'll do one thing, but it always does the opposite. It's doing things to its own people that violate the idea of human rights, the Uyghurs, the Falun Gong, Christian, Muslim groups, you name it, all in the name of stability, which, they're creating instability in these ways. So, my message to the Chinese people is this propaganda you're hearing that the U.S. is the enemy or treats China as the enemy is absolutely false. This is why we didn't say China during the Trump administration. We said the Communist Party. We didn't say China is upsetting stability in East Asia. We said the Communist Party is doing it. The government of China is doing this. The Chinese people have no say. It's not a democracy. They can't actually voice their opinion. And so we need to pick our words better when we talk about these things.
We get back to the topic of Taiwan. A lot of the Chinese supported media in Taiwan. They expressed some idea that when in war, the U.S. will leave you here.
Right. Yeah.
They will turn their heads around and turn back. So my question is, we talk about the treaty. In 1950s, there was a treaty between U.S. and Taiwan. We call it the Mutual Defense Treaty, right?
Yep.
At that time. Yeah. So It's a similar like U.S.-Japan security treaty, that there was a kind of a responsibility for both sides of the treaty. That one was attacked, and the other one we're getting the action of a military. So after U.S. established its formal relationship with the PRC, that treaty was abolished. Now CCP is much stronger than that time, and there is no treaty to provide the protection to Taiwan right now. Would the words of a White House be enough to deter CCP's invasion, and to say how to motivate Taiwan's determination of a self-defense? I think that's one of the strategy the CCP to hold, that after their invasion, like 72 hours or a few days later, the government in Taiwan will surrender. At that time, they will occupy this island legally. That's their words. So yeah, please. How's the White House?
Yeah, a couple of things on that. One, in 1979, when we did change our recognition from Taipei
President
to
Nixon.
Beijing, we also at the same time passed the Taiwan Relations Act, which is congressional language that says we still have a relationship with Taiwan, right? The question of Taiwan is not settled. China, the one China principle, what Beijing calls its one China principle, says there's only one China and Taiwan's part of it. That's not our policy. Our policy is the question of Taiwan is unresolved. And our policy is that we insist that that question be resolved through dialogue, not through coercion or use of force. And so what Beijing is doing today by flying military aircraft like those, threateningly into Taiwan's airspace, using economic pressure, coercion, is in violation of the agreement in 1979 and 1982, the three communiques. And so, yes, the U.S., although we no longer have an explicit security treaty like we have with Japan, we still, in the Taiwan Relations Act, have language that says we will continue to provide military hardware, military equipment, so Taiwan can defend itself. And the third communique said, as long as China reduces its threatening equipment and presence opposite the Taiwan Straits, that we would reduce arms sales to Taiwan in order to reduce the risk of war on both sides of Taiwan Strait. Well, the corollary is also true. If the PRC continues to raise its threatening position on the other side, we feel no problem in raising our support to Taiwan. The point of this is to prevent China from feeling like it can just use force to dictate the outcome of the question of Taiwan. It's a very simple formula. Beijing understands this, but they have to use this other language. It says, you promised you would draw down our forces. We promised we would draw down if you draw down first, China.
But I think what you're talking about is from the Reagan government. It's a kind of like if you rise, I rise. It's a kind of a mutual response. But how about in this case, when we are short of treaty, what legislative or military action can U.S. take to secure Taiwan? Not only the sales equipment. The Taiwanese and the Chinese Communist Party supported media will say that's the business way. That's the U.S. business way. They are not frankly, they're not honestly to support you. They do propaganda like this. Do U.S. have some legislative or military action can take to secure Taiwan?
The Congress has changed its attitude considerably over time. The Congress is very serious about Taiwan now. Whenever I went up to speak to the Foreign Relations Committee, they were asking serious and meaningful and hard questions about making sure Taiwan did have the correct defense capabilities to prevent, deter, stop the PRC from using military force. And because the Congress is serious, it makes the rest of the U.S. serious, right? The whole government is taking this situation much more seriously than we did 10 years ago when I was in the Pentagon. And that's a good thing. The other thing is, if you read what the the PRC writes about these things. I was looking for my other book. I can't find it right now. But if you look at what they write, they don't want to fight. They want to win without fighting through political warfare. And that's through like this, media warfare.
Media war.
As you mentioned, that Taiwan is a victim of media warfare. The PRC is in their news, it's in their papers, it's everywhere, just like we're seeing in Hong Kong. And they are able to, like I said, remember we were talking about using propaganda to change people's minds? You've got people in Taiwan who believe maybe it would be better if we were, part of larger China. They're using that nationalist attitude you mentioned, Minzu Jui. So we have to fight in these areas first, because the military is the last choice, I think. The PRC is not going to invade Taiwan or blockade Taiwan because they stand to lose. Xi Jinping keeps telling the PLA, prepare for war. He's not telling them to get their arms ready and get ready to go shooting. He's telling them to stop goofing around, stop dabbling in real estate, and get serious about modern warfare. And that's pretty clear. So I don't think he has a lot of confidence in the military. And we should be prepared to deter. And we've done that with Japan's very positive support of deterring and coming to Taiwan's aid. But I think we all, especially this show, what you are doing today is media warfare, is making sure that, the message getting to the people in Taiwan, the people of the US and everywhere else understands that, what China's telling you about Taiwan, what they're telling you about the Olympics, what they're telling you about the Uyghurs is all false. You can't believe a word of it. And we should do what we can to limit it, access to the Western world, to Taiwan. Let's fight that economic battle. Look what China's doing with economics, right? It's threatening people. Lithuania, they're threatening the entire Lithuania and European economy because they're angry at Lithuania's choice of naming its Taiwan representative Taiwan instead of Taipei. But look, if we all join in, we can all resist this. We've shown that with Australia and others. If many countries come in alongside Australia, the economic threat that China uses is invalid. It doesn't work. We need to hang together. We all need to work together on this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's very efficient action.